What's going on, everyone? It's Phil from Earth Nails and Tails, and today we are going to be planting some citrus trees in order to be able to harvest your own lemons and limes at home. Your citrus really prefer to live in those warmer climates where it never gets below freezing, and preferably not even into the 40s. But if we're in a colder climate, we can utilize pots in order to grow our citrus all year and reap the benefits. I picked up a couple citrus trees. One is a Meyer lemon and the other is key lime, both of which should provide some delicious fruit. I also grabbed some potting mix that is designed specifically for palms and citrus, as well as some terracotta pots. So let's get into planting and really talk about what these plants need to survive and thrive. So I got myself a couple terracotta pots in order to plant my trees in, and I didn't get a huge pot for a few reasons. As our tree grows, we're going to want it to provide it a larger and larger pot. And starting off with a smaller pot, you could probably even start off with something smaller, but this is a 10-inch pot. And I really like the look of terracotta, but it does come with some challenges in regards to planting your lemons and your limes. Terracotta pots are porous, so they're going to be able to dry out a lot faster, so you're really going to have to stay on top of watering and be a little bit more diligent with watering, which we'll talk about. But I've got my potting mix, which is made specifically for citrus. I normally don't love Miracle-Gro, but this is the only thing that I could find that was formulated for citrus. So I'm just going to go ahead and get this in here. What this mixture is formulated for is to retain moisture as well as have good drainage, which your citrus trees absolutely love. So in here, if you come in a little bit closer, you can see that there's some larger chunks of material, some bark, some wood chips that's mixed into here, and that's really going to help keep the soil more aerated and allow some better drainage. Overall, though, I'm actually pretty happy with how the soil looks. It's got really great structure. It's nice and dark. It's got a little bit of perlite in it. What I'm going to do is fill up my pot halfway for both of these here. And I'm going to mix in a little bit of compost. And I'm adding in the compost just to inoculate the soil with microbial life, which is really going to wake it up and help these plants absorb as much nutrition as they can inside of this pot. And it's also going to help with the soil properties, making it a little bit more rich, able to retain moisture as well as drain well. So lots of great reasons to add in compost. So I'm just going to get this mixed up. It probably would have been better to do this inside of a container, which is what I always preach, but incorporate this the best I can. All right, so the pots are full, and I didn't fill them up all the way. Basically, looking on the outside, I filled them up to this line. One, I want to have enough room in order to move the soil around to physically plant the tree in the pot, but I also want to leave enough space to be able to water it, so that way the water or the soil isn't flowing over. Now, the size of the pot really matters. One, because we're controlling the amount of soil and nutrition that is available in the pot, because this is the only soil that these trees are going to be growing in. So one, we need to provide excellent soil for these trees to grow, and that's why I added the compost. Another thing I'm going to be doing is adding some fertilizer. You can use a larger pot, but the one thing that you need to consider, the reason we're growing it in pots is because we need to be able to bring these trees inside in the winter and then bringing them outside again in the spring and the summer. So we need to have a pot that is small enough for us to be able to handle. And you really need to think about that as your tree gets larger as well. But for now, this 10-inch pot is absolutely perfect. I can easily handle this, and that's what we're going to start off with. In regards to fertilizing further, I've got some fruit tree fertilizer here by Dr. Earth. This is really great stuff. Also inoculated with beneficial bacteria and fungi that are really going to help to break down all of these materials and make them biologically available to the plants. So all I'm going to do is look at the back of the bag right here, and this is specifically citrus and avocado, so it's perfect. This is formulated for citrus as well. And it says, before you plant, add 2 cups per half of a cubic foot or approximately 5 gallons. I think this is about a gallon of soil, maybe a little bit more. Again, I'm guesstimating. So I'm gonna have to add 1/5 of 2 cups, which is kind of up in the air. You could do the math. What I'm going to do is just take a handful and sprinkle that in my soil. This is a slow release fertilizer, which I'm comfortable just making this guesstimate measurement here, just to get the trees started off. And then I'm gonna mix that in gently into the soil. You don't really need to mix it too deep, because once you start watering the soil, those nutrients are gonna flow to the bottom of the pot. So just get it incorporated like that, and we'll put a little bit of soil on top if we need to. So that's what it looks like. Do the same thing for this one. And if you have your citrus trees already, or if you know you're getting them in the future, go ahead now and take out your phone and set up a schedule on your phone on how often you should be fertilizing your citrus trees, because you're going to have to fertilize them on a regular schedule, because this is the only access to nutrition that they will have. They're 100% reliant on you being planted in these pots. So if we look at this bag one more time, the recommendation would be to apply every 3 months throughout the growing season. So every 3 months, and that's really not that often, I'm going to reapply my fertilizer. So it's honestly pretty simple to take care of these trees. Now I'm gonna start off with my key lime here. We're just gonna separate this a little bit, see how these roots look like. Not too bad, but they are a little bit root bound here. They're starting to spiral around that pot. So I'm just gonna pull this out real quick. Now I want to tease these roots. I really want to break apart these roots a little bit, so that way they're sticking out of the root ball that they were living in, and they're gonna be able to penetrate that and start to grow into that new soil. So just kind of massage them really lightly with your hands, not trying to break them really or anything, until it basically gets to look like that, where our roots are really sticking out of the pot there. Now, we're just gonna give them a small hole, and you see my tree's leaning a little bit here. In the future, I might actually prune off this branch, but I'm gonna leave it for now. But I wanna position the tree kind of like in this angle, just to get it to grow up more vertically. So now I'm gonna move this soil out of the way. Get this tree toward the center as best I can. I'm gonna actually move this to here. I'm making a mess, which is exactly why I'm outside and then in the grass. I think that looks good right there. So now I really want to just kind of press that in the soil, and then we're going to add this back all around here. I really want to make sure I get all these roots covered, and that looks good. So there's our nice key lime all planted. I'm going to do the exact same thing with my Meyer lemon. Now I want to start talking about general care of these plants. You don't want to let these plants dry out at all. You want the soil to stay relatively moist throughout its whole life. And this plant looks a lot better. These roots are really going to love going into this pot here. So a great rule of thumb in regards to watering is if I take my finger and I stick it in the soil, my pointer finger, stick it in the soil, and the tip of my finger is dry, that's when I know when to water. One thing you don't want to do as well is overwater, because if you overwater a plant that's in a pot, it's very likely that you're taking all of that nutrition and you're simply washing it out of the container, which we absolutely don't want, because that's the only nutrition that's available to this plant. So that's why you really want to wait between waterings, or wait as long as you possibly can between waterings, to ensure that you're not overwatering and oversaturating that soil and flushing those nutrients out of this pot here. During normal circumstances, I'm probably not going to be using this saucer, just because there's only one drainage hole on the bottom of these pots, and I really want to make sure that these plants are able to drain. Just like they don't want to be dry, you don't want to let the root system dry out. You don't want them to be overly saturated, because citrus roots are really prone to rotting. So by not using the bottom dish, I'm going to allow this to drain a little bit better, and that's going to keep the plant healthier overall. So now that we know how to plant our plants and the general care in regards to fertilizer and water, let's talk about probably the hardest part with growing citrus, and that's transitioning them from life indoors to outdoors. As I said, these plants really don't want to be exposed to temperatures that are really less than 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Your Meyer lemon can go probably withstand temperatures in the 30s, but I would recommend keeping them in the 40s or above. So in the fall, when you see those temperatures really start to cool down, when nighttime temperatures are approaching the 40s or in the 40s, that's when we want to start transitioning our plants inside. And if you're familiar with hardening off, we're basically going to do the exact same process where we take our plants from outside and we want to find the sunniest spot in our house. So something with a southern facing window and put them right in the window. We're going to put them in that spot for 1 hour the first day, bring them back outside. The second day, we're going to bring them in for 2 hours. The next day, 3 hours, 4 hours, etc., until they're inside all day long. And then we're going to leave them there for the winter. If you see your plants either transitioning them from outside to inside or inside to outside, if they lose some leaves, don't freak out. They're just adjusting to their new conditions. They're going to regrow that new foliage and they'll be just fine. But we want to do the exact same thing when they're transitioning from inside to outside. Wait until those temperatures are probably approaching the 50s consistently at night, and then we can start hardening off our plants for outdoors. For citrus, they're typically bearing their fruit sometime between November and April. And unfortunately, this is also the time that we're going to be bringing them inside. So right before you bring them inside, you're going to want to give them probably a little bit of fertilizer or do that final dose of fertilizer maybe 2 weeks to a month beforehand. And that will give them the fertilizer and the energy that they need in order to continue growing fruit indoors with less light. In regards to lighting, your plants really need at least 8 hours a day. I would probably recommend 10 because think about where citrus live. They live closer to the equator. They're getting constant light all the time. So if you don't think that you're able to provide your plants enough light, either outside or inside, you're going to have to supply them some sort of supplemental light. So try to put them a place on your property when they're outdoors that's going to get light exposure somewhere between 10 plus hours a day. And when they're inside, look at the window that you have your plants placed in and really start to track how long they're getting sun exposure for. Because if they're getting less than 8 hours of sunlight during the day, you're going to have to provide them some supplemental light, especially if you expect them to fruit indoors, which is, again, sometime between November and April. The very last thing that we're going to talk about with our citrus trees is pruning them. And you can decide to prune them or not. I would recommend pruning any of your fruit trees. And if you want to know a little bit more information about pruning fruit trees in general, you could check out this video that we did on pruning any single fruit tree. But in regards to your citrus, you're going to want to prune them in the early spring. The reason being is these crops, these plants are never going to go dormant. They're always going to have some sort of green foliage on them. They may lose their leaves at some point, but that does not mean they're dormant because they really are ever-bearing plants. So wait until your plants have at least flowered or maybe have even fruited, and then you can go ahead and prune them in the early spring. And what you really want to remove is diseased, decaying, or dying branches. Those are 100% regardless of the orientation of the plant because you don't want to spread any further disease. Additionally, you'll probably want to remove any branches that are growing toward the center of the plant because, again, that's going to promote disease because you're going to have intercrossing branches or leaves that are rubbing together, and you're not going to get as much sunlight exposure on those as well. So that's a general rule of thumb for citrus. At the end of the day, growing these plants really is pretty straightforward. From planting to fertilizing to watering, and just understanding how you need to transition these plants from indoors to outdoors makes the process that much simpler. So I hope this video inspired you to go out and get your own lemons or limes or other tropical citrus, grow them in pots, and enjoy some fresh and delicious fruit at home.